Welcome to Tom's True Crime. Today we take you to Napa, California. On the morning of February 13, 2020, Lyn Brocknello reported that her husband, 65-year-old George Brocknello, had passed away. Well known in his circles, the former marketing executive was thought to have died from a heart attack initially. However, upon the arrival of emergency services, it became clear that Mr. Brocknello died from a stab wound to the chest. Various theories were considered, including self-inflicted harm. Later forensic experts determined that the incident was a criminal act of taking a life. Sometime later, the perpetrator was identified. The person who helped George meet his end was his beloved wife. By July 2023, she stood trial. Yet this story is not straightforward. She did not admit guilt for the intentional crime and frequently changed her testimony. The legal battle between the prosecution and defense was long and heated. Ultimately, the court's verdict was unexpected for everyone. What really happened in the beautiful city of Napa, California? Who is the true victim, and could the tragedy have been prevented? Sitting in the defendant's chair is 46-year-old Lyn Brocknello. The accused is of slim build and short stature. Her auburn hair has visibly grayed either because she had no opportunity to visit a hairdresser, having spent about 3 years in custody, or perhaps the gray is a testament to her inner turmoil and stress. Until 2020, she was just an ordinary working woman, a mother of 2 wonderful children, a specialist in media production. She was not particularly well known. However, after crime against her husband, her name was frequently highlighted in the media. This is what happens when the dirty laundry of seemingly respectable spouses is aired publicly. Lyn was born in 1977 in California. After some time, her family moved to Liberty Lake, Washington. Her childhood was typical in many ways. She grew up kind and well-mannered, with a creative nature. Lyn was the eldest child in her family. As she matured, her appreciation for beauty intensified. She enrolled at De Anza College, where she earned an Associate of Arts degree. Later, she was admitted to the Communication and Leadership Studies Department at Gonzaga University. In 1996, Lyn's mother, Kathy Grunheik, remarried. However, the marriage was short-lived, lasting only 2 years, after which Kathy passed away from cancer. It turns out that she had been battling breast cancer for a long time. Thanks to her husband George's comprehensive insurance, she received high-quality medical care, which was the primary reason for legally formalizing their marriage. Unfortunately, the treatment ultimately did not yield the desired result. After his wife's death, George became not only a widower, but also a true father to her children. Since it was difficult for George to raise them alone, he asked for help from Kathy's eldest daughter. At that time, 22-year-old Lyn was living independently, but responded to the request. So after Kathy's death, George Brocknello, Lyn, her brother and sister, all ended up living together. At first, the relationship between George Brocknello and Lyn was built on friendship. Lyn took care of the younger kids and worked part-time at a restaurant at night. George was building his career in marketing. He grew very attached to the children, who became like his own. He also felt comfortable with Lyn over time. She saw him as a dependable support. Despite the 20-year age difference, their interaction was easy and natural. Gradually, George and Lyn grew closer. Neither age nor status bothered them. However, Lyn initially didn't want to make their relationship public to her family and kept it hidden for a while. With his new partner, George felt younger and more energetic, and she felt loved and protected. Since he had good business connections, she easily found her a new job in an advertising agency. Besides, he had a high income and devoted all his free time to the family. Overall, things were going well for both of them. After some time, George Brocknello received a tempting job offer. He was invited to become the vice president of corporate sales. However, the new job required moving to another state. Without hesitation, he asked Lyn to come with him, but she hesitated. Lyn didn't want to change her familiar lifestyle, and she was still studying, so she declined. Yet their relationship continued long distance, and the lovers often saw each other. One day, he showed her the house he had bought for them, impressing her. The house was located in a picturesque area. The neighborhood was quiet and cozy. Ultimately, Lyn decided to move and live together. To ensure she had no doubts, George found her an interesting job in a multimedia design company. Later, Lyn recalled that at first, everything was perfect. It was only George's job that later brought changes many years later. During the trial against Lyn, her 15-year-old daughter, Amanda, testified. She spoke of how George was an excellent father who did a lot for his family. Along with her 8-year-old brother Mark, they attended one of the best schools, hoping to pursue careers in marketing, thanks to their dad's encouragement and support. Amanda was close to her father, which she couldn't say about her mother, whom she saw as hysterical, manipulative, and toxic at times. Amanda believed that Lyn instigated all the conflicts at home. George tried to keep the family in peace. But was it really as Amanda, the elder daughter, perceived? And what caused the discord in what seemed like a happy and united family? George Brocknello's new position came with increased responsibility and stress, and he had a difficult relationship with the management team. This took a toll on him. He became very stressed and tired eventually. To relax and unwind, George turned to alcohol. Over time, this became a daily occurrence. He would often stay out late, returning home intoxicated and angry. The tension in the house was intense. Lyn tried to support her husband, understanding his condition. After talking to her, it seemed he would calm down and promise to stop. But his promises were short-lived. One time, George missed a dinner they had planned together, which was not the first occurrence. But this time, they had specifically arranged to spend the evening together. Lyn was very upset and stated that if he couldn't make time for her, he should have told her so she could make other plans. Heading towards the door, she made an ill-timed joke which struck a nerve with George. He stood in the doorway and hit her across the face. The slap was so forceful that she staggered back. She then noticed that her clothes and the floor were splattered with blood. In shock, she recoiled from her husband, who began crying and apologizing. Clearly distressed, George tried to make amends immediately. He took his wife to a friend of his, a doctor, and explained what had happened. The doctor examined the unfortunate victim and provided first aid. He then recommended seeing a dentist to fix the chipped front tooth. The next day, George arranged a special dinner at an upscale restaurant. He was very attentive and caring. Undoubtedly, his wife forgave him and did not report the incident anywhere. There was a fairly strict domestic violence law in the state, so Lyn Brocknello felt sympathy for her husband and decided not to cause him any further trouble. In fact, this was not the first warning sign. Lyn had already encountered similar behavior before this incident happened. While they were living together in Liberty Lake, they went to a concert. Lyn chatted with an ex-boyfriend, which made George jealous. On their way home, he dropped a few sarcastic comments about it. Lyn responded in kind. Unexpectedly, he hit her, then immediately apologized, saying that he did it because she hurt his feelings. Lyn forgave her partner, blaming herself as well. Over time, the incident was forgotten. After all, these things happen in relationships. In 2004, the Brocknellos welcomed their first child, a daughter named Amanda. A year later, the couple decided to legalize their relationship. It was a bright period in their lives. Everything was going well. However, George still faced challenges at work. The management changed, and he couldn't get the promotion he had hoped for. 7 years later, the family grew with the addition of a son named Mark. The parents were fully engaged in raising their children. With George's job, the tension escalated and he began drinking again. This led to more frequent conflicts. During one argument, George grabbed Lyn by the throat and pinned her against the wall, which terrified her. This time, his wife couldn't tolerate the rough behavior. She packed up, took the children, and moved in with her relatives. It's worth noting they did not approve of the marriage initially, but eventually came to terms with it. George repeatedly visited her, apologizing and asking her to come back home. After some time, their relationship was restored. The following years were unstable. The Brocknellos moved several times. The family patriarch was offered a job in California, where they lived for about 5 years. This period could hardly be called successful. George again struggled with his issues and continued to indulge in drinking. There came a time when both spouses were unemployed and lived off their savings in 2015. Another move was on the horizon, this time to Missouri. However, the prospects were promising. To find a new home and settle matters, George went ahead first. Lyn stayed in California with the children. They needed time to sell their old property and belongings. The constant moving had become exhausting. It was difficult for the children to adapt to the rapidly changing environments. The number of times George's discontent escalated into physical aggression increased. However, Lyn did not leave him, Despite her dissatisfaction with the situation and resentment toward her husband, she continued to love him deeply. The ongoing situation also affected Lyn. She became nervous and irritable, withdrew into herself. To distract herself, she took up photography. Nevertheless, their family still appeared respectable, as most of their disagreements did not extend beyond the home. By the end of 2015, the Brocknellos finally settled in California. This time, George decided to change his career path. Tired of the constant stress, he took a position as Director of External Affairs and Partnership Programs at the State University in Fresno and began teaching. Although his income was less than what he had made as a marketing executive, the job brought him enjoyment and stability. Initially, the family rented a home, but after a year, they purchased their own property in the picturesque area of Napa. Their family home was impressive. The house was designed in a Mediterranean style and had a huge square footage. Lyn's favorite is the attic floor, which served as her retreat. She often spent nights there, especially when George had bouts of anger. Testosterone injections rejuvenated him and restored their intimate life. But even during intimate moments, he could be harsh. Their relationship remained tense and unstable. Against this backdrop, Lyn developed an alcohol dependency. While George worked and supported the family, Lyn managed the household and children. She became increasingly withdrawing into herself. The numerous disputes eventually led to the couple separating in 2017. Despite this, George continued to see the children and support them financially, paying the bills. By this time, Lyn had found a job at an advertising agency. New acquaintances helped her out of her depression, and her responsibilities restored her independence. However, she still continued to see George. He could come and go as he pleased. During one of these days, another argument ensued, after which Lyn ended up in the hospital with a concussion. She kept silent again and did not tell the truth about what happened, fearing it would cause problems for her husband. But this time, George took her silence for granted. During questioning at the trial, Lyn confessed that in early October 2017 something extraordinary happened. Her husband had tried to run her over with his car. She was saved only because she managed to jump into the bushes. After this, Lyn went to the police department. However, when detectives began to inquire in detail about the incident, she changed her mind and left. The reason was the same as always. Later, the couple reconciled and moved back in together. However, this turned out to be a fateful decision for both of them. At around 9 a.m. on February 13, 2020, a 911 call was made. Lyn Brocknello reported that her husband George had died from a heart attack. When the rescue service arrived at the scene and entered the house, they immediately noticed a strong smell of cleaning agent at the entrance to the living room. The team encountered a bucket filled with pink-colored water. Beyond this, a scene straight out of a thriller movie unfolded. A man lay on the floor in a pool of blood, lifeless. It was clear that the unfortunate man had not died from a heart attack as his wife had claimed, but from a penetrating knife wound. The woman who made the call was also found with cuts on her wrists. Paramedics provided first aid before taking her to the hospital. Following them, the police began their investigation. When law enforcement examined the scene, they were certain that George Brocknello's life had been taken. It was unlikely that he could have inflicted such a fatal injury on himself. Later forensic analysis confirmed that the blood traces in the home belonged to the deceased. The pink liquid in the bucket at the entrance was nothing but diluted blood. Someone, possibly the homeowner herself, had tried to erase a blood trail leading from the bedroom to the living room, indicating that the body had been dragged. Despite the cleaning efforts, not all evidence was destroyed. Blood spatter was found in the corners of the room and on the walls. Moreover, a large knife lay at the entrance to the kitchen, and 3 smaller knives were found in the sink. Detectives were eager to speak with Lyn. Therefore, once doctors reported that her injuries were not life-threatening, she was questioned. During the interview, she repeatedly changed her statements. Initially, she claimed to have thought her husband died of heart disease. Later, she stated that he had taken his own life following an argument. However, experts refuted her claims. Such a wound is difficult to self-inflict, and individuals intending to end their life usually choose a simpler and less painful method. The autopsy showed that George died from blood loss. With timely medical help, his life could have been saved. Additionally, he had a lacerated left eye. Toxicological tests also revealed a high level of alcohol in his system. The investigation revealed that a few days before the incident, There was an argument between the spouses witnessed by their elder daughter. George had been drinking and burst into the bathroom where Lyn was hiding. However, their daughter Amanda intervened, taking the bottle away from him. After this, Lyn left the house and returned once her husband had fallen asleep. According to Amanda, it was the first time she had seen such a burst of anger in her father, for which he later apologized multiple times. She still maintained that he was a loving and caring father, while asserting that her mother was the instigator of conflicts. The next day, the couple reconciled. George invited his wife and children to a soccer game. However, according to witnesses, Lyn appeared upset and was virtually non-communicative. That evening, the parents dropped their kids off at a friend's house for a sleepover and were left alone. Later, Lyn stopped by McDonald's and returned home around 10:30 p.m. Upon entering the house, she found her husband drunk. During dinner, Lyn received a message from an unknown man. George saw it, bit off a piece of his hamburger, and spit it at his wife. He then attacked her, attempting to strangle her. In self-defense, Lyn grabbed the first thing she could, a knife, and stabbed him in the chest. He fell and began to bleed profusely. According to the defendant, she immediately called emergency services, but mistakenly dialed the wrong number. Her actions were later corroborated during the investigation. In a state of shock, she lay down next to George and fell asleep until morning. At least that's how Lyn explained the 11 hours of inactivity. When asked by the prosecution why she lied during the emergency call and subsequent questioning, Lyn Brocknello explained that she was afraid. She was concerned that no one would believe she had acted in self-defense. There were reasons for this fear. Shortly before this incident, she had been involved in a scuffle with friends. When police arrived at the scene, she resisted, attempting to bite one of them. She also refused to cooperate with the investigation, leading to charges of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Lyn had been on probation for about a year. It was also established that the cuts on her wrists were self-inflicted. She claimed she had tried to end her life due to the emotional turmoil, but the nature of the injuries suggested otherwise. They were superficial and not life-threatening. Therefore, her claims were not believed. Investigators also discovered that Lyn was far from a role model. After learning of George's infidelities, she signed up on a dating site where she interacted with men and retaliated by being unfaithful. Her profile status declared that she was single and not in a relationship. Analysis of countless messages between George and Lyn showed that she still loved her husband. Once she learned of his affairs, she felt betrayed and disillusioned. She also found out that George planned to leave her. Despite appearing repentant and desiring to mend their relationship, Lyn explained that it was hard for her to understand and accept her husband's actions. She was heartbroken that she had dedicated the best years of her life to a man who did not appreciate her. The prosecution used this information against her. The prosecutor argued that the crime was premeditated in a fit of rage because she could not forgive his infidelity and the impending divorce. Just like George Brocknello, Lyn was also prone to fits of anger, confirmed by their neighbors who noted that the couple often argued loudly, escalating into physical altercations. However, George and Lyn were described differently by those who knew them. George was portrayed positively as kind and helpful, while Lyn was seen as quarrelsome. Video evidence was presented showing the defendant acting irrationally and attacking her husband. Friends and George's brother agreed with this portrayal. One of them recalled calling her crazy, but assured that all would be well as long as steak knives were hidden. Lyn's lawyer argued that her actions were dictated by self-defense and a history of emotional and physical abuse. Relatives, often witnesses to their arguments, confirmed that George was rough and emotionally abusive. They also knew he frequently physically abused and humiliated her. Although he never did so in their presence, some family members reported that Lyn was nervous and quick-tempered, which only emerged after years of marriage. The prosecution clung to the fact that she effectively left her husband to die, which indicated she was waiting it out. They proved that her account logged into a dating app the night of the incident, suggesting premeditation driven by hatred and resentment, possibly even for financial gain. Following the divorce, Lyn stood to lose a portion of their accumulated wealth. At the time of George's death, her net worth was estimated at $1.2 million. It was also brought up that she had repeatedly changed her statements, seemingly trying to confuse the investigation and possibly tampered with evidence. However, the defense maintained that George Brocknello was a manipulator and predator. After his first wife's death, he pursued his stepdaughter relentlessly and molded a young woman to suit his needs. During the investigation, The prosecution offered the defendant a plea deal to admit to manslaughter, which would have resulted in only 10 years of imprisonment. However, she declined, despite the fact that if found guilty of first or second-degree murder, she faced a life sentence. She continued to insist on her innocence. The outcome of the trial was surprising to everyone. On August 17, 2023, the jury delivered their verdict. They found Lyn Brocknello not guilty of premeditated murder, as they believed her actions were indeed in self-defense. However, they found her guilty of tampering with evidence, for which she received a 5-year suspended sentence. Having already served 3 years, these were credited to her on September 5, 2023. The day the sentence was announced, the defendant was released in the courtroom. She was free to go home. The verdict was met with mixed reactions, some feeling the jurors had been cleverly misled and that Lyn's taking George's life was calculated and cold-blooded. Others arguing that Lyn had already suffered enough. For George Brocknello's close friends and family, the memory of his kindness and generosity remained strong. They found comfort in remembering the good times that they have shared with him. While the scars of George's tragic end will never fully heal, the community support and resilience offer a glimmer of hope for the future. Thank you for being with me on this episode of Tom's True Crime. If you are interested in more in-depth investigations into the most perplexing crimes, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. What are your thoughts about this case? Please share them with us in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe.